Okay, so thanks again and welcome back for joining us today. Our Lunch and Learn as part of day 2 of our writing retreat is developing an edited collection with the University Press, and we have the co-editors of the Arts of Indigenous Health and Wellbeing here with us today. I want to begin by acknowledging that I'm joining today from Treaty 6 territory in the homeland of the Métis. My name is Allison. I'm a settler originally from Belleville, Ontario, which is Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Huron-Wendat territory. And I want to welcome you. I know everyone is joining from a variety of locations from coast to coast. So thanks for joining us today. And we'll spend about an hour together. And if you've got questions, you're welcome to pop them in the chat. I'll begin by introducing the co-editors, and I'm excited to have them all here. A number of them are mentors of mine. Nancy sat on my committee for my thesis, and Dr. Innes was my supervisor, and Dr. Henry and I shared an office for the 5 years it took me to finish my master's. So I'm excited to have everyone here today, and I just met Jade today, so that was really lovely as well. So I'm super grateful that you are all able to join us to talk about this new edited collection and a few of the other projects you have on the go as well. So Dr. Nancy Van Styvendale is a white settler scholar and is an associate professor and associate dean research in the Faculty of Native Studies at the University of Alberta. And I think that's an up-to-date bio. Jade McDougall is a Métis PhD candidate from Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. Her current work explores Métis family stories through community history, archival research, and zine practice, using kinship models as a framework for understanding, repoliticizing, and reclaiming these narratives. Robert Henry is an assistant professor in the Department of Indigenous Studies at the University of Saskatchewan. And Robert Alexander Innes is a member of Cowessess First Nation and an associate professor in the Departments of Political Science and Indigenous Studies at McMaster University. He's the author of Elder Brother and the Law of the People and co-editor with Kim Anderson of Indigenous Men and Masculinities. I'll pass it over, I think, to Bobby to talk about the Arts of Indigenous Health and Wellbeing to start us off.
Thanks, Allison. Yeah, the person with the shortest bio gets to start everything off, I guess that's the way we said. So hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm actually in Treaty 1 territory right now for the next couple of days doing some work in Winnipeg with my community partners, Kanamatuin, or OPK. And so right after this, I'm actually going into a classroom and speaking with high school students about some of the research that I'm doing. But for right now, so we'll talk about this book and this edited collection here and how we kind of came together with all of this. So the whole idea of the book started way back in 2013. Myself, Nancy, and Rob put together a CIHR dissemination grant, and for NAISA when it was being held in Saskatoon. And so NAISA is the Native American Indigenous Studies Association. It's the largest conference that brings together Indigenous and non-Indigenous scholars focusing on Indigenous research and issues. And Saskatoon got to hold it, and Allison was basically the linchpin for the entire conference that year. So she knows everybody now across all these spaces. But we'll talk about the uses and abuses of graduate students for conferences at another time, and how to say no. But we were successful with the grant, and what happened was because Saskatchewan, for some odd reason, we are really good at raising money and everything else. We actually didn't use the dissemination grant for the conference itself, and so we had this money. And while we were there, we saw that Saskatoon had an anomaly in relation to other NAISAs, and that was with a high focus on health research. And so what we did was we went through and started to collect all the abstracts that were done at NAISA, focused on health research, and started to thin them out to find out, okay, what was there, what wasn't. And we actually created a collection, Global Indigenous Health, which was the first collection that we put through. And this is one of the first collections of its kind that focuses on the issues of health-related issues of Indigenous peoples globally, and looking at it not from deficit approaches or a biomedical approach, but more of a social science approach within that collection. What we found out while we were going through a lot of this as well is that a lot of the abstracts that we're seeing, we're focusing on arts-based methods in health. So we're actually seeing now, when we look at health research, we're seeing a lot of focus on the connections of arts to well-being and health. at this time, there wasn't a lot going on. So we began to start pulling out the different ways in which the abstracts were looking at how do we look at well-being? How do we understand well-being through the arts, looking at it from literary perspectives, looking at it from music and so forth. And we began to see that we actually had a second collection that began to supplement the first collection. And so this is where the second collection began to come through. And this is where we came together and decided to put another collection through the University of Manitoba Press in. And as we can see here, and Nancy will be talking about this right away with the chapters and how it all got pulled together, is that when you start looking at developing edited collections from, especially across conferences, it's really hard to find thematic spaces, but then you begin to see connections. And this is where within the health space, we're beginning to see the importance that arts-based research, the humanities, is really having on our understanding of health and well-being, and is actually pushing health research, Indigenous health research specifically in Canada and globally. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Nancy to move forward with how the collection sort of framed itself out and came into the different sections that it had.
Oh, that's great, Bobby. Thank you. I think I would just add in terms of the content of the collection, because folks, I mean, I would encourage folks, I think it's coming out. When is it coming out? In December? Soon. We just got the index put together, and so it should be, and that the book is finalized. There's no more editing to go, so I think it should be any month now. But anyway, I encourage people, hopefully you'll be able to access that through your libraries or pick up a copy. But I think just to add to what Bobby was saying, I think that one of the distinctive features of this collection is that it features a lot of humanities scholars, well, Indigenous studies scholars primarily, but then many with a humanities focus, and then many who are artists themselves. And so we have arts-based health researchers, artists who practice in the areas of dance, of music, poetry, performance arts, humanities scholars, social scientists, education scholars, people who do literary theory, cultural rhetorics, linguistics, digital humanities, gender studies, disability studies, ethnomusicology, film, etc. But I think a lot of the work that exists in the intersection of Indigenous health and the arts is coming from health researchers outside of those areas, more located primarily in the health disciplines. And I think what this collection adds that's unique is people who are positioned more within humanities and arts practice. So that's one of the distinctive features. I think one of the other distinctive features is that the collection really pushes back against focus on health disparities and that kind of damage-centered approach to health research, looking at disparities between Indigenous and non-Indigenous health. I think instead we're focused on the wealth of Indigenous expressions of health and well-being through the arts, looking more at what Eve Tuck has called like a desire-centered approach to research. And I think we're inspired by people. The collection is dedicated to the late Joanna Piscanu. We're inspired by her work and others, people who have looked at the importance of taking a literary approach or an arts-based approach to thinking about Indigenous health and well-being. I think that's all I wanted to say. In addition, I don't know, Jade and Rob, if there's anything that stands out to you about the collection in and of itself that you wanted, the content that you wanted to focus on before we get into more of the editing practice.
No, that was awesome. Thanks, Nancy.
Oh, I guess, I mean, I could say we have it's divided into 4 sections, and the first section is focused on material culture. So there's one article, for example, by Gail McKay looking at a pouch and sort of taking a cultural rhetorician's approach to analyzing this pouch as an animate being, as an animate being, and the relationship between material culture and well-being, the relationship between embodied practice and well-being. And then the second section focuses on community health and wellness, there's an article there by health researchers who are looking at the use of theater in Indigenous community with youth. There's an article on Inuit art and sort of reframing the concept of resilience and looking at it less in terms of kind of individual resilience and more in terms of community resilience. The third section of the collection talks about healing in relation to land and body and tradition. And then the last section is talking about resistance and resurgence and imagining otherwise. So thinking more about futurisms and imagining wellness into Indigenous futures. So hopefully that's a good overview. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. So the next kind of question for the group is around the opportunities and challenges for participating in an edited collection, both as an editor or a co-editor, and then as well as a contributor based on your experience with this and other projects. And I know a number of you have worked on a variety of edited collections over your tenure. So I'm not sure who wants to maybe speak to that first, Jade or Rob.
I can speak to that a little bit just in terms of, this is my first edited collection, so I probably have the least productive information for everybody, so I'll keep this fairly brief. But for me, like, it was really interesting, I think, working on a collection where you're part of a team of people, right? I think usually, at least in our field, Nancy, we had maybe, one or two sort of editors working on something like that, rather than like a larger team like this. So I found that it carries, like, yes, it's challenges just in terms of keeping everybody like organized, right? Making sure that everything sort of has, consensus, or that we've discussed all the important kind of points of this among us as a group, rather than being able to make executive decisions. But I think that also like strengthened the collection quite a bit, right? In that we're all coming from different disciplinary kind of backgrounds as well, and we're all kind of approaching it with our own areas of expertise and interest, which I do think for an interdisciplinary collection like this was a huge strength. So so that for me, was both a challenge and an opportunity to work with, especially as a kind of junior academic, right? As a grad student coming into this, it was really great to benefit from all the expertise and just being able to work with Bobby and Rob and Nancy. It was fantastic.
I think I've been fortunate enough to be in 3 or 4 or something like that, I forget, a number of edited collections. And the first one I was involved in was with Kim Anderson. We did this book on Indigenous men and masculinities, and and I was really fortunate because Kim has done, I don't even know, probably close to 10. I'm thinking maybe 12 edited collections, and and so working with her as my first edited collection really gave me the groundwork, or the ground rules, or the particular kinds of ground rules, her ground rules, I guess, in terms of how to approach an edited collection, in terms of in terms of what it is to be expected from us as the editors, right? And one of the things, one of the things that was really helpful, I think, in terms of our responsibilities was really reading over the submissions. Once you have a draft in, and then the editors then read over the drafts and give feedback and send them back to the author. Then the author comes back again with another draft, and so and we would read them again, right? And again, offer comments and suggestions for potential revisions. And I noticed that in other collections, as being a contributor in other collections, this was not a process that typically happened. At least I didn't see that. I didn't see us getting feedback from the actual editors. I would submit an article, and next it's off to be peer reviewed. And I remember one book where it was off to be peer reviewed, about I was like quickly finished that chapter, and it was kind of it was almost a rough draft, but I was thinking, but I'll get feedback and I have a chance to revise it, and it went out as a kind of like a rough draft, right? So and so the feedback from the peer reviewers reflected that, right? And so, but what I saw when we gave the feedback, even though that was a lot more work up front, it was a lot less work at the back end in terms of now working through the final proof stages and the copy editing stages. I found that the number of revisions that authors had to do at the copy editing stage was much less, because it had been reviewed a number of times. So so for me, I think having having been with Kim, with that first book, with her ton of experience, really helped me, and to rather than fumbling through dark, like I do most of the times when I'm trying to figure out how to do something. But yeah, so I mean, I don't know if I was had any kind of I don't know what kind of influence I had on this book, right? But I don't know if I had any influence, but but for me, generally, in a general sense, in terms of helping, it's having the kind of the mentorship of Kim, I think has influenced, well, not I think, definitely influenced how I approach doing edited collections, and not that the way I did it in that book or way Kim did in that book is the way things have to be, because it is a collaborative process. As we kind of work our way through figuring out roles and responsibilities, but nonetheless, that gives me like a launching pad to delve into working through that collaborative process.
Thanks. I'll maybe just say to anybody listening, if you have questions, if you want to pop them in the chat or unmute yourself, feel free to do that and ask them. And I've got a few that have kind of come up for me, but I'll maybe leave it for a bit and to the group. And then Nancy and Bobby, if you have anything to add around opportunities and challenges, I'll open it up to you as well.
Yeah, I'll just go real quick. So when these edited collections started, I was a grad student just finishing up. And so this was for myself, I think it's for grad students, if you can find yourself a project, something like this, it actually helps you begin to understand the amount of work that goes into this, but it is rewarding as well at the same time. So being in this space and doing these two collections, or starting the two collections when I was a grad student just finishing up, it allowed me to read a bunch of different work out there, and allowed me to see like, how does my research actually fit in across these different spaces, and how do I begin to reread these other things within that, and what are the gaps that are happening there. So it allowed me to be critical of the work out there in a way that wasn't about just critiquing the work, but about finding ways to critique the work to make it better, so that I'm also a part of that work. And so that was really interesting for myself to learn how to do that, and be working with individuals who have gone through editing. Like Rob said, the idea of doing this on my own from the very first time, I think would scare the living crap out of me. But now doing it a couple of times and having individuals who can mentor you through a lot of this, who've done it before, you begin to see what works, what doesn't work. But that individuals have been successful going through this, because it does take a lot of time. And with this collection, it took a lot longer than other collections that I've been a part of. So I'm also did the Settler City Limits book, and with that, there's 5 of us on that one, and I was the only one who had an edited collection before, so they actually looked to me to help guide that collection, which I was like, okay, this isn't going to work out if I'm the one guiding everything, so we better figure something out. But it worked out really well with that one. But we followed the same process that we're using for the Global Indigenous Health books, where we did like almost like a double bind peer review, if you will. Like, we all read them, gave comments back, and then when it went back out to get a peer reviewed, it got peer reviewed again. So technically, the way in which the articles went through, they've been peer reviewed by the editors, ourselves, plus it went out to a blind 2 peer review as well. So when we're looking at journal articles and publishing in journals, they only go for a double 2, so they only get 2 and then it comes back. This one actually went through basically 4 people and then came back and then worked within those pieces to get it working ready. So these collections, actually, when we look at it for the amount of work and peer review, like, it is actually a very rigorous process that these collections did go through, which is very similar to the Settler City Limits book. I'm working on another one right now with Oxford Press, which is very different. It's going through our review and then it goes through another review and then it's done. And so it's a very speedy process with Oxford to get it out, which is interesting on how that works. But so don't worry if you do send a chapter into an edited collection, it'll get there. Just the one thing I will tell you is continuously send emails. If you don't hear anything about where your stuff is, send an email to the editors and just ask, and they'll get back. They usually get back to you pretty quickly. At least we did with our book. I felt that Nancy did a really good job of getting back to anybody in this collection, and Jade, as they took kind of the lead role on this part. And then with the other one, I tried to get back as soon as possible as well with all of that. So, but it's something to think about as graduate students. Where do you want your work to go? The other thing too with edited collections, they're probably read a lot in our communities than journal articles are. So if you're looking at community engaged research, you want your research to go out into the audience. So think about that as well. This is peer reviewed, it goes in. Some universities don't count the edited chapters as much as they would a journal article. So also look at that when you're looking for jobs. But again, if you're looking at it from Indigenous studies, you can always write within there that you actually work in this area of edited collections, because it's part of what we do about building relationships and sharing our knowledge in this way. And the idea of knowledge mobilization, that our communities actually read these books more than they'll go onto a journal and search for journal articles. So when we look at this is a way in which we rewrite and reshape the academy itself on what they see as Indigenous research and Indigenous knowledge outcomes as well. So I'll leave that there.
You know, I'll just want to jump in and add one thing to what Bob was saying. I mean, he kind of touched on it, but I think that I mean, I didn't know this at the time, right? But you know, when I was first doing the working with Kim, but the thing with one of the big difference between in the peer review process between a journal article and say an edited anthology is that with the journal article, you will get 2 peer reviewers reviewing one of the articles that appears in that journal, in that issue of that journal, right? So for each journal, if there's like 5 articles, then there's 10 peer reviewers for each of those, for the combined for that issue of that journal. For the book, you only get 2 peer reviewers reviewing all the articles, right? So, you know, having the editors go through it is very helpful, because sometimes when you get the peer reviewers, you know, their comments may be very good in terms of one article, but non-existent for another article because they don't really know it very well. So it's why I think that's one of the other benefits of having the editors go through each journal or each article or each chapter that comes in, just so that the author can be feel more confident, even though there may be more revisions asked of the author, but at least they're going to be confident that once they've done these revisions or addressed why they shouldn't do the revision, they can be confident that this has been reviewed by somebody or a few people, and that, you know, that is it's as strong as it could be, right? So, and I you know, sometimes you're not going to get that all the time for, you know, for every edited collection.
Yeah, this is really interesting. I'm learning as I listen to you folks even more, because I do think the process of editing a collection is quite different depending on the group that you're working with, what their prior experiences have been with editing, and then also the press that you're working with and what their level of support and engagement is. I think it can vary quite widely. So one of the tips I had, this is for the next section, but I can just bring it up now, is just to, if you are an editor on an edited collection, is just to be clear with the press about sort of what their process is and what the supports are that they offer, and sort of what the editing cycle looks like from their perspective. Because yeah, some will want more upfront work by the editors, and some may not. It sounds like, Bobby, maybe that's your experience with the most recent one that you're working on. So anyway, it just varies, is my point. So I've worked on 3 edited collections. So I think Rob probably has the most experience of all of us. Rob for the win. I've worked on 3. The first one, interestingly enough, was 3 grad students, 3 PhD students. I was one of them, editing a volume called Narratives of Citizenship. That's from a very long time ago. I'm not trying to plug it because there's many shortcomings there, but that was interesting because we were all graduate students and we did not know what we were doing, and that came out of a conference as well. So I've only worked on edited collections, these 2 with Bobby and Rob, that came out of the NASA conference and the funding we had through CIHR, and then the one, Narratives of Citizenship, that was done with other grad students. And that was quite challenging for sure, just to give you an idea of where I'm coming from. In terms of opportunities and challenges for participating in an edited collection, I made some notes because I'm uptight like that. Like opportunities, I guess the main one would be to make an intervention. You know, that language we can problematize, but to make an intervention in your discipline or in your field. I think that's a scholarly opportunity. There's also the opportunity to grow connections in your discipline or field. So to get to know people, I found that to be a really useful opportunity that comes along with edited collections, because you work quite closely not only with your fellow editors, but also with the authors. I was also thinking of, Rob, we did a visit with one of our contributors, Louise Half, and we met with Elder Louise Half and talked with her about her piece. And then in the previous collection, Global Indigenous Health, I didn't visit in person with this contributor, but one of the contributors there I spent quite a bit of time with on the phone, and she didn't have a lot of internet connection, so we worked quite closely on editing her piece together. But in terms of an opportunity, I think that sort of visiting piece, and I'm tying that here. I don't know if people have read Cindy Goodett's paper on visiting methodology. If you haven't read that, you should read it. It's a great piece on visiting as Indigenous research methodology. But I think that kind of visiting that you can, it's not necessarily a part of editing, but it can be woven into an editing strategy. And I think that can be a real opportunity to do editing in a different sort of way, and to do it in a relational way. So certainly we didn't do that for all of our contributors, but there were a few. And I think that's something I would like to think about more with future collections. It's like how you can build the visiting piece in. And then I had other opportunities, but I think folks have already mentioned them. In terms of challenge, yeah, the timeline. I mean, this one was a ridiculously long timeline, but so certainly don't expect in your own work that a collection will take 8 years, because this is really long, but they always take longer. They always take longer than people think they're going to take. I don't think I've ever heard of someone saying the collection went faster than they thought, right? It's a long process. It's more involved than you think. Yeah, another challenge is, I think, echoing what Bobby said, and this might be dependent on discipline. I'm not exactly sure, so take it with a grain of salt. But I think an edited collection and editing, the work of editing, publishing in an edited collection as a chapter author or even as an editor does not count as much as other types of academic publication. So that was a surprise to me as a grad student, to know that editing work I don't think is valued as much as it should be. I mean, it certainly counts on a CV, and especially if you're applying for jobs, people look on that favorably. But I think a chapter in an edited collection, and Bobby, correct me if this is not what you were saying, but a chapter in an edited collection is not always seen with as much weight as a peer-reviewed article. That's problematic. And I love how you, Bobby, were talking about, making the argument that community would actually engage with edited collections more, that they're more accessible. Like, that makes a lot of sense to me as an argument for why an edited collection publication is important. I think the rationale behind valuing the peer-reviewed article more is that it's double blind. Well, at what Rob was saying, in terms of you have two people really closely looking at the article, and then it's also double blind reviewed. So put aside the horrible ableist language there, but that's the language that we use to talk about how something's peer reviewed. So you don't know the name of the person that when you're reviewing an article, you don't know whose article it is, right? And they don't know who you are as a reviewer. Whereas in an edited collection, they know who the peer reviewer knows who the authors are. So that's seen as perhaps not as rigorous a review as an article, a peer-reviewed article. So I think that's the logic, but I like the way that Bobby problematized that. And again, this might be taken up differently in different disciplines. I'm not exactly sure. And then, of course, writing a monograph, like a single authored piece, is, I mean, it's a lot more work than an edited collection, but it's seen as so much more quote unquote valuable within the academy than publishing an edited collection. I think, again, there might be disciplinary differences there. Just a few other challenges that I thought of. Collections are sometimes uneven in terms of quality. So that's one of the challenges, is working with authors. Some pieces are going to be really strong and some pieces are less strong, and sort of reviewers and presses want a collection that is strong across the board. And so sometimes you have to work with certain authors more than others to develop the piece. Although I don't think I said this before, but that assisting people in developing their piece for publication is actually can be really rewarding and can be an opportunity in and of itself. And I think related to that challenge of the unevenness of collections is this idea of when we put together these collections, we were working from abstracts. So we were working from very short descriptions of what the chapters would be about, and we invited full papers, people to submit full papers. But I think in retrospect, what I think I would do in the future is invite full papers for consideration, and then evaluate at that point if we were going to invite people into the collection or not. So I think that it happens in different ways. Sometimes editors will invite abstracts, and then those abstracts will be reviewed and someone will be invited to contribute. But sometimes full papers are invited. Then if you have a full paper in front of you as an editor, you have a better sense of how the person has developed their thinking. Like, an abstract is a very short, doesn't give you a lot to go on as an editor. I don't know for the rest of you what you think about that, especially Rob and Bobby. I guess you were there at that initial stage where we were just working from abstracts. I think maybe in retrospect, I would call for full papers and then go from there. But yeah, I've talked too long, so that's it.
Thank you. I've got like so many questions and so many kind of thoughts percolating. I want to see if Bobby, did you want to jump in on that at all, or? No, you're good. So maybe I'll move it to Jade to speak to your perspective as a grad student participating as an editor in an edited collection. And one of the kind of thoughts I had as listening to the group kind of talk about the experience, and from my own experience, is also how you get involved in it. Like, I would never have had a chapter in an edited collection if Rob wasn't like, hey, put your chapter in this collection that I'm editing. So maybe some thoughts for students on whether it's approaching faculty or editors, or just, yeah, something around that as well. Because I think maybe if you don't have a supervisor who's like, do this thing and submit your chapter for publication, it's maybe a little bit of a different process. So just wanted to hear about your experience on this volume and more generally.
Yeah, absolutely. Fortunately, I actually, like, my experience does fall in line with having a supervisor who is really great about tapping me on the shoulder and saying, hey, you should do this thing, or hey, here's this opportunity. Nancy's been really great about that throughout my entire, PhD trajectory. So that was how I came onto this collection. I'm pretty sure, like, there was sort of a team of grad students. I think this was in the initial kind of stage when there were sort of these two potential kind of collection ideas floating around. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, this is, like, my memory is horrible, but we had sort of been brought on sort of in a, I guess, more of like a, okay, let's go through these and kind of sort them, into different kind of almost piles, I guess, or like which ones kind of might be better suited to this collection, which ones might be better suited to this other collection, and kind of giving our feedback as well, which was wild to me, because of course, as a grad student, for me to be reading, the work of some scholars who were like far more established than me, and then saying, okay, well, can you poke holes in this, or can you find weaknesses, or can you, right? I felt like, and that was one tip that I sort of had for grad students, like, you got to be ready to kind of take that on, or get comfortable with the idea of critiquing people's work who are like much more established in the field than you are. That was kind of a part of that, is sort of being willing and ready to kind of step up to the plate in that way, and to sort of participate in a fuller way. And I know that there were times in this process where I sort of was like, well, I'm not familiar with, the expectation in terms of, going to press, or in terms of, all these other logistical things, because I just didn't have the experience. I did defer a lot to the other editors, but in terms of, I think, in terms of offering feedback, offering suggestions, offering your opinion, you'd have to be ready to contribute in that way. And I think it took me a little while to get comfortable with that, for sure. But luckily we had some time to kind of to develop that as a team. So that I thought that was actually a really important thing for me, in terms of feeling like I was then ready to, like, join in the academic conversation, right? To start participating in that way, and to come into the field like as a peer, right? I think that's like such a massive mentorship opportunity, and it gives you a chance. I can't remember who was mentioning this, to see a little bit about, when a paper, I think it was Bobby actually, that you can see what papers look like when they first come in, before they've gone through the several rounds of editing. It made me feel a lot better about my own writing, in a sense, because you can see that these, polished, finished articles are actually the product of many hands, and are the product of a lot of different stages of labor from a lot of different people. So that was actually really affirming, and to find out too that, you have things to offer to other people's thinking, right? And that you do have contributions to make in your work, in your field. That was a massive opportunity. So that was kind of my one main thing, was just be ready to participate in the fullest sense, right? So not only to be comfortable, or to get comfortable, might take some time, get comfortable contributing as, as a peer to your editors, if you're sort of the junior member of the team, and then also be prepared to devote like a lot of time to it. Nancy, you mentioned that as well, but like be prepared to like put everything on hold, if like, because I guess, publishing is can be a little bit hectic, I guess. It's sort of like, okay, well, we need this back in a couple of days, and it's like, okay, I guess my life is going to be put on hold for a couple of days while I do this, right? Like, there's sort of a, like, you have to sort of treat it like your child almost. I don't know, if something comes up, that kind of thing. So I think being willing to do that while also saying, you know, guard your time as well, right? Especially as a grad student, you've got so many things going on, and you know, you're not necessarily being like compensated, right, for this in like a monetary way, right? So there's a bit of a, I don't know what you would call it, like a tightrope maybe to walk between really, you know, putting forward your time in a meaningful way, but also, you know, not sort of like being completely like consumed by this project, that sort of thing. So that would be one, I guess, maybe concrete thing to put out there. If anybody else wants to jump in too about that, I know Bobby, you mentioned that you had sort of for the global Indigenous health, that was sort of your grad student experience as well. But yeah, I feel like that was kind of it for me.
Awesome, thank you. Maybe I'll open it up to the group in case there are questions. I know a few students who and faculty and community members who are participating in the writing retreat are working on articles for publication, or also have experience using arts-based methods in your own research. So I'll just open it up to the group. And I want to say thank you to our guests as well for sharing your experience with us today. It's really great to hear about the collection. I'm looking forward to reading it. And I shared in the chat the link to pre-order, and I'm sure it'll be on campus here and elsewhere in the near future as well. So I'll open it up to the group if there are any questions that are that you guys have.
While people are thinking of questions, I'll just jump in with just a couple of other things, like just a couple of other tips that I didn't know before I did a collection. Like one is, if you can, if there's some sort of support, funding support you have, to hire a professional editor for the formatting before you submit the manuscript for peer review to the press. If you can hire a professional editor to go through and format the thing, that's amazing, because that's a huge amount of work that you don't need to do. And if you have funding to hire someone, awesome. The other thing is indexing, that you, as editors, you actually have to pay for indexing. The press doesn't pay for indexing of your book. So just an FYI that has to come from some funding somewhere. And you do apply for, always in Canadian presses, you apply for a ASP grant, which is Aid to Scholarly Publishing Program. It's through the Tri-Council. You always apply for one of those, and I think we got one in it's around $8,000, and it goes to the press to basically to help fund the publication of the book, because it's expensive.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I've got a couple other questions too, like in terms of the Global Indigenous Health was published with UBC Press. I see this one is U of M Press. What kind of factors into your decision of going with one publishing house versus another? And you spoke a little bit to each publishing house's process, but does that have to do with like the topic area, or why different presses, I guess?
So the reason why we went with we went with the University of Arizona Press, which is affiliated with UBC, just like University of Manitoba, I believe, is affiliated with University of Minnesota or Michigan. I can't remember what press it is. So in North America, usually a lot of the American presses are associated to some of the Canadian presses, and vice versa for publishing and printing and those sort of things. So how we actually went with the first collection to the University of Arizona was, I went to NASA, and they always have all the presses there, and I actually just started to talk about the collection, and it was University of Arizona that got back and said, we would love to see this, just send us a little piece on what you're trying to do. And I sent it in, they said perfect, because they wanted to expand in the area of health and Indigenous health. And so that's how we went in with that. When we went to the University of Manitoba, it was because Rob had a relationship with the University of Manitoba through the Indigenous Men and Masculinities book, as well as his elder brother book that went there. So that we already had sort of a relationship being built there. that could help us get in there. And then Nancy built even a stronger relationship with them over the time, and that's how it is. So when we look at presses, I think this is something that grad students need to think about too when you're looking at your dissertation and putting your dissertation into a book, is to find the press that actually suits the need of what you're trying to do, because everybody's trying to grab the Indigenous content right now and they're trying to go with it as fast as possible. So I would really recommend doing your background check on the press itself. So, and again, the other part too is to also think this as grad students, not just with edited collections, but publishing, is the press itself will have an impact, also has an impact factor, just like a journal article has an impact factor on where you go. So if you publish through University of Toronto Press, it's seen as being a better press than going through another smaller press, even though that's peer reviewed and everything else. So, but it's built off a long-standing thing. The other thing that you have to realize is that we also have presses that aren't associated to the university. So Fernwood Publishing, for example, has a lot of books that they publish, and it's actually a really strong press, but it's not seen as a university press. So that press is actually seen as less than university presses all the way through. And so, and it's based off of the idea of peer review and the rigor of putting the collections or the book together. So really, those are some things you need to think about where you're going to publish. You are going to be approached, some of you, if you're doing your master's, if you're doing your master's for the first time, some of you who've done your PhD, you'll probably be approached by predatory presses as well, that will come and ask you, say, oh, perfect, we're looking at this, like send us your thesis and we'll get it published for you. One of them is Lambert Publishing out of the UK. I know this because my master's is published there and I don't even know what's going on with it. So, so I get nothing from them. But so it's, and I learned the hard way. So I'm just telling you right now, be very cautious where it is. But when you go to conferences and when the conferences start opening up again, I really recommend going through those book fairs and talking to the presses. So the book that I have coming out right now, it was Doug Hildebrand, who used to be the acquisition editor at University of Toronto Press and now went to the University of Alberta Press. And it was him that actually said, do the women's book, and they're going to put it through the U of T Press. And when he moved, I just kind of carried it with him and went that way because he was really honest and open and supported me going through that. And so that's why that book went through that press. So you can build pretty good relationships with the editors. And when you have an idea, they'll come and if you present it to them, they'll be perfect. Like, how do we support you? What do you need? Like, how do we'll get you moving along here a little bit and get you on timelines, which is, I think, what we really need a lot of times in academia, are these timelines within this. So yeah, I do recommend when you do go to those conferences, really go through those, the press fairs, and just get to know who the presses are and how they're treating people, and what is being put out there. Because you don't want your work sometimes to go into certain areas simply because of the editor that's in place. We've seen this with specific presses in Canada and all that. So just be very cautious. That's one thing I would just say is, just because you're in academia, it doesn't mean everybody's out there looking out for your best interest or the community's best interest. So you need to find your networks that way.
Thank you. And I think too, like talking to your supervisor probably, or running any of those opportunities by that person probably is a good place to bounce stuff off of in terms of them having maybe more knowledge in the field, as another suggestion as well.
I would just,
sorry,
Allison, I was just going to quickly add, I mean, look at the catalogs that the presses have and see how your work fits into what they offer. I mean, I think U of M Press is a really good fit for this, in addition to the relational piece that Bobby spoke to, and the fact that Rob had strong relationships with U of M Press, the fact that they have done a lot of Indigenous literary studies work means that they have an investment in that area of Indigenous arts, and so it makes it a good fit for that reason as well. And I like, Bobby, what you're saying about sort of going around and the book fairs and meeting people, because there is a certain kind of fit too that you can get a sense of, like the fit that you'll have even as an individual with a press and the people who work there. I know my experience with U of M has been fantastic. Like, I love their approach. They're quite hands-on. They're super supportive. And that's a bit different for me than other experiences I've had. So yeah, I think it's just a sense you get of how they work with their authors.
And I want to go back, Allison, what you said, like working with your supervisors and that, because when I was first looking at publishing a bunch of this stuff, it was actually, I was walking through with Maggie Kovach, and she was talking, had a meeting with the University of Toronto Press and all of that. And then and I kept going through and I was saying, this is the research I do. And they're like, oh yeah, it's interesting. And gave me a card, and they weren't really like, give me the time of day or anything really like that. But she kind of came there and then sat down and said, you need to look at his work. And she sat me down with me. And then that's how my work got put into a bunch of different places, and they started to actually listen to me, and they started not listening to me, but actually taking it almost seriously, that what I'm doing was like, so when you're looking at this idea of mentorship and all of that, I think that's really important, is to make sure you have individuals who have gone through this, who know you, who also have relationships with the different presses and respect your work, to also be there with you and say, hey, you know what, I'm going to speak at University of Manitoba Press. Come with me real quick. I want you to introduce them to you. And that's how you build that, because the press doesn't want to piss off other individuals who they've seen as successful going through the presses. They want to keep those individuals. So it's something to it's playing the game. It's you got to build your relationships and use your relationships. So I think it's an important little thing to remember. So.
Awesome, thank you. We've got like 2 minutes until 2 o'clock Saskatchewan time. Are there any other questions that anyone has before we say goodbye?
I felt like I saw Rob put his microphone on and off a couple times. I was tantalized. Rob, what did you want to share?
Lots, so much, so much, but I forgot. But yeah, I did forget actually. But I think, I was going to say that I've published a lot with the U of M Press. Actually, the global Indigenous health one with University of Arizona is the only book I haven't published with U of M. But I think that for me, I mean, I kind of stumbled onto the U of M, and then and because they're small, and it's a little bit easier to get to know them, and they were very encouraging to me for my first book. But I saw some of the experiences that other people are having with the more established presses like University of Toronto, UBC, McGill, Queen's, which is to be able to have your books, especially your first books, or any book, but your first book published with those big presses, is a huge accomplishment in terms of the kind of reach that those presses have, and the kind of PR machine that they are. And so that's like the plus. The minus is, well, it's a little, you're kind of a number, right? So and you can get kind of lost in kind of the number in those numbers. But that's not to say that those big presses aren't the way to go, right? I mean, and certainly there are people in those presses. Bobby met one that are good, and that will offer the kinds of one-on-one kind of service that you will come to expect from a smaller place. So it really is a matter of getting to know people and kind of listening to other people in terms of what kind of experiences they've had, right? So, but yeah, I think that the main thing, I think that Bobby was saying is, talking to the presses. I never thought my book, my elder brother book, was publishable. So I started to send out, a couple of chapters to be published in journals. And so I never really thought it was publishable. And what I really found out, and because it ended up getting published, and so what I really found out, that we are not the ones to decide whether or not it's publishable, right? Let the experts decide that, because if we have to decide it, we're gonna say it's probably not that good, right? So so go talk to people, tell them what you've done and what you're doing, and let them decide whether or not they're interested. Don't make the decision for them. Make them make the decision.
But can I jump in? Allison, I know you want to wrap up, but I feel like I gotta say this one last thing because Rob's comment reminded me of it. I was given really horrible advice. I won't. This is being recorded, so I won't go into a ton of detail. But I was given horrible advice about publishing my PhD dissertation, which I didn't. So I haven't published a monograph, but. And in part it's because I was given horrible advice and I didn't go to a diversity of presses and talk to them about their approach. So I was basically told that I would have to change 30% of the dissertation in order to publish it as a monograph, and that weirded me out because I didn't want to change 30%. And it was that percentage piece, and I just thought that was a thing, right? Like, okay, now this person's told me 30%, so that's got to be a thing across all presses, and it's not. There are usually some changes that a person will make to their dissertation when they send it in, but it's not necessarily 30%. And so my advice out of that is just to say, if you have a dissertation that you want to publish as a monograph, sorry, now moving out of edited collections, but that you want to publish as a monograph, like talk to the presses about what their process is and their expectations, because that was a serious error of mine to just assume that because one press said that they would all say the same thing.
And I just want one more thing to say, as grad students, be sure that when you're doing an edited collection with other individuals who aren't grad students, or you're working with assistants, associates, or full profs, be sure you're getting, and Jade kind of touched on this, be sure you're getting credited for the work. And don't be afraid to say, listen, my name goes first, or I get this much to say because I did the work. I think a lot of grad students are afraid to speak up because they just think that getting their name out there is important, but you need to take control of your work and make sure you are in control of that. If you are the lead person of that, you need to get credit for that. You need to make sure that you're with that. So that's why, again, working with Nancy and Rob for myself with these collections has been really well, because we figured out a process at the beginning on how to say how much percentage or whatever you get for the book and where it's all at, and we rotated that out and we made it out very clear at the beginning. And so you need to really make sure that, because I've been hearing a lot of stories of grad students who are saying that they put a lot of work into the book and all of a sudden they're not getting credit, or they're putting a lot of work into a paper with somebody and they're not getting their name on as an author within different things when they're doing a lot of the work. So know your worth, and know that the paper would not be moving forward, or that edited collection would be moving forward without your worth and your work being put into it. So it's not just about getting experience, it's about making sure you're getting the value of that experience as well within your lifetime, because everything you're doing from now on will be going on your CV, will be going towards you getting jobs and careers and moving yourself forward. So you have to realize that and look after yourself.
And you put that on your CV, right? You put the percentage. So you need to have a conversation, or you can anyway, put the percentage of your labor into the project. So you should have that conversation with the other people on the team to figure out sort of how that work is being valued.
Thank you. Yeah, I didn't even know you could do that as part of your CV in terms of the percentage. And so yeah, that's really, really helpful. Jade, we haven't heard from you in a little bit. Do you have any final thoughts with regards to your experience, or just on what's been talked about lately?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think, like, just to build on what Bobby said, like, you definitely will want to make sure, right, that, you know, even if you feel like, you know, you're just starting out, or you're not quite sure, you're feeling uncertain, you're not necessarily comfortable. I know I wasn't comfortable at first, right? Like, kind of taking this position, or kind of joining the team in like the fullest sense, because I felt like, oh, who am I though? But that sort of thing. Ideally, right? Like, the people that you're working with, and I guess maybe choose wisely there too, right? Like, you want to surround yourself with mentors who actually care about you and who want the best for you, and who will look out for you and go to bat for you and respect you as an equal participant, respect your time and respect your labor as well. If you feel like that's not happening, that should certainly, yeah, raise some red flags. And I think that, yeah, knowing your worth is so important. And because if your name's going on there, that means that this is representative of you. So make sure it reflects that, and be cool with that, I guess.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you to everybody for joining and participating today. I really appreciate your time and sharing with us your experience on this and other collections. I've shared in the chat a few of the links to some of the books that were mentioned. If there's anything I missed, because I know there were a few names that were mentioned as well of authors or scholars to kind of take a peek at, let me know and I can share them with the group. And yeah, thank you to Jade, to Bobby, to Nancy, and to Rob so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. And yeah, hopefully we'll connect again soon. And I look forward to taking a look at the book once it's in my mailbox.
Yeah, thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.